On October 16, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis between the United States and the Soviet Union brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. It woke up all the nations to the dangers of the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The atomic bomb, one of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century, became a threat to humanity and global security. It is the global responsibility of nations to eliminate the use of nuclear weapons without taking away the right to the peaceful development of nuclear technology. In 1939, Leo Szilard, Enrico Fermi, and fellow European scientists who fled to the United States to escape Nazi and fascist repression learned that Nazi Germany was getting close to developing an atomic bomb. They felt it was their responsibility to inform President Roosevelt of the dangers of an atomic bomb in the hands of Nazi Germany. As the United States was at war with Germany, President Roosevelt approved of the building of an atomic bomb in 1942, which sparked the start of the Manhattan Project under the leadership of General Leslie Groves and scientist Robert J. Oppenheimer. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was tested at the Trinity site near Alamogordo, New Mexico. At 5:29 a.m., an enormous ball of fire and a bright light lit up the sky. The first atomic bomb had exploded. This changed the world forever, marking the beginning of the nuclear era. Even though Germany had surrendered, Japan refused to surrender. The military leaders of the United States feared a prolonged war with Japan would result in almost 1 million Americans dead or wounded. To end the war, on August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, in Hiroshima. The second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on August 9, 1945 in Nagasaki.
At the time, people did not understand nuclear weapons the way we understand them today. They understood them only as a much larger explosive than the chemical explosives they were familiar with. And so I think in that context, the decision to use a nuclear weapon in Japan made sense.
The atomic bombings led to the surrender of Japan on August 15, 1945, ending the World War II. The world saw the destructive power of nuclear technology. The bombs destroyed the cities, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Many were injured due to the heat and radiation. 5 years later, it was found as many as 340,000 people had died in these bombings. The delayed radiation effects caused genetic birth defects, brain damages, and cancer to the survivors.
The end limit of nuclear weapons is potential global destruction. And so nuclear weapons are quite simply unique and historically unique because they have completely rewritten the rules of war and potentially the entire course of history.
Scientists like Joseph Rotblat and James Franck had warned the United States about the prospects of a nuclear arms race if the atomic bomb was used in Japan.
There was one towering moral genius in the Manhattan Project, Dr. Joseph Rotblat, who won the Nobel Prize in 1995, who said at the time, "We should stop the project because the Nazis are not going to develop this bomb, and if we develop it, we will use it, and if we develop it, others will develop it and it will spread."
Soon after the bombing of Japan, the Soviet Union had built their own atomic bomb, followed by Britain, France, and China. This led to the nuclear weapon proliferation as Joseph Rotblat and James Franck had predicted. Out of the Cold War, after the Soviet atomic bomb success, the United States felt the right to build a more powerful bomb to increase its military security. The scientific community was split over the issue of building a hydrogen bomb. Edward Teller of the Manhattan Project supported its development, while scientists like Oppenheimer, Fermi, and Rabi felt it was their responsibility to oppose its development. Since no limit exists to the destructiveness of this weapon, its existence and knowledge of its construction is a danger to humanity as a whole. November 1st, 1952, the United States detonated a hydrogen device in the Pacific that vaporized an entire island, leaving behind a crater more than a mile wide and destroying life on the surrounding islands. The United States used Marshall Islands for nuclear weapons testing from 1946 to 1958. All Marshallese people were relocated during the tests. The tests left the islands contaminated and unsuitable for people to stay due to the radiation effects. The rights of the Marshallese to live on their islands were violated.
Many of these programs were secret, and the information was not given or was not known to give to the people.
The nuclear test explosions conducted by nuclear nations ruined the ecosystems, and radiation effects will make these test regions uninhabitable for thousands of years. It also caused genetic defects, cancers, and radiation-related illnesses to people in the nuclear test regions and its surrounding areas. Nuclear nations, the United States and Soviet Union, felt the need and responsibility to control nuclear testing due to its effects on global security and the environment. On December 8, 1953, President Eisenhower delivered his Atoms for Peace speech before the United Nations General Assembly, which led to the formation of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In October of 1962, a United States spy plane found missiles being built by the Soviet Union in Cuba. President Kennedy demanded the removal of all missiles from Cuba and ordered a naval quarantine. After 13 days of standoff, Soviet leader Khrushchev agreed to the removal of the missiles in exchange for lifting the naval quarantine and a pledge that the US will not invade Cuba. The two leaders showed great responsibility by preventing a nuclear war. Cuban Missile Crisis exposed the need for global responsibility to stop nuclear proliferation. President Kennedy feared the United States would be facing a world with 25 nations possessing nuclear weapons by 1970. He considered this as the greatest possible danger and hazard. He felt it was the global responsibility to stop nuclear proliferation and environmental damage caused by testing. In June of 1963, he proposed a treaty banning nuclear tests. The Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed in Moscow on August 5, 1963, which prohibited nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater, but allowed underground tests. It also asked the countries to work toward complete disarmament and end contamination of the environment by radioactive substances. Even though the United States and the Soviet Union refrained from testing, other nations did not. The nuclear weapon proliferation continued. The United States and the Soviet Union took leadership in negotiating a global agreement that would stop the spread of nuclear weapons. The landmark Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1968 and entered into force in 1970. This treaty gave non-nuclear states the right to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, and nuclear states the responsibility to eliminate their current stockpile. As of now, all countries except Israel, India, and Pakistan have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Some countries have not signed the treaty because they feel the treaty is discriminatory toward nations not possessing nuclear weapons before 1967, with no disarmament obligation for existing nuclear powers. North Korea has withdrawn from the treaty to continue nuclear development. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is the most widely accepted arms control agreement in history. Even though nuclear technology is used for weapons, it can also be used for peaceful purposes in the fields of medicine, power generation, and water resource management. It is widely used in the medical field for X-rays and to help diagnose and treat a variety of diseases. While most nations use peaceful nuclear technology responsibly, there are some countries like Iran who use these avenues to create fissile material that can be used to develop weapons. International Atomic Energy Agency ensures peaceful uses of nuclear technology are not misused. Even though a few nations have not signed or withdrawn from non-proliferation treaties, without these treaties in place, global security and damage to the environment by nuclear proliferation would have been irreparable and devastating. As the great scientist Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project, said after the first nuclear test, quoting from the Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, destroyer of all worlds." This shows the true power and the destructive nature of the nuclear bomb, one of the greatest scientific discoveries. It is the responsibility of all nations to prevent the use and testing of nuclear weapons. It is inhumane and damages the environment. Nobel Peace Laureate Organization, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, estimated that a few nuclear weapons going off would so adversely affect the climate of the planet and put over 1 billion people at the risk of starvation. Most importantly, the biggest threat is political circumstances that the nuclear weapons create. It is a global responsibility of nations to negotiate their elimination without taking away the rights of nations to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
Nuclear weapons present a unique historical phenomena. They force the first generation possessing them to decide whether they in fact would be the last generation of human beings. The capacity that nuclear weapons provide human beings to destroy history is unprecedented.